To just welcome today's talk, A Stitch in Time, with author and social historian Dr. Dianne Snowden. Today's talk, A Stitch in Time, the Rajah Quilt and the Women Who Made It. The convict ship Raj brought 180 female convicts from England to Van Diemen's Land in 1841. The voyage is noted for the creation of the quilt made by the convict women under the supervision of the young ship's matron. The Rajah Quilt is the only known surviving quilt made by female convicts during their voyage to the colonies. It was found in a Scotland attic in 1987 and gifted to the National Gallery of Australia in 1989. Today's talk is being broadcast as a webinar, and we are pleased to welcome those people who are joining us online today. In due course, the talk will be available on Libraries Tasmanian SoundCloud and Libraries Tasmanian YouTube channel. So if there are notes that you want to take, you can always look back on the YouTube channels. If you haven't already done so, can you please switch off your mobile phones? Di, would you like to take questions at the end of the talk?
I will take questions at the end of the talk.
I really didn't like them talking. Before I introduce Di, I'd like to read to you the Libraries of Tasmania Acknowledgement of Tasmania's Aboriginal Peoples. Libraries Tasmania recognises the deep histories and cultures of the Aboriginal people of Victoria, Tasmania. We acknowledge Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional and continuing custodians of the land, waters and sky. We pay respect to the elders past and present who hold the memories, traditions, culture and knowledge of country. We extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples whose countries were never ceded. I'd just like to introduce a little bit about Di. She was awarded a member of the Order of Australia in 2017. And as a researcher to a higher education into heritage groups, she was admitted to the Tasmania Honour Roll of Women in 2017. And please join me in welcoming Dianne.
Thank you, Sandra, and welcome everybody. Can you hear me down the back? Yep. Okay. On the 19th of July 1841, the convict ship Rajah arrived in Hobart Town with its cargo of convict women as well as 10 of their children. Royal Naval Surgeon Dr. James Donovan and 3 passengers, Reverend R. Roland Davies, W.H. Herrick Esquire, and the young ship's matron, Miss Kezia Hayter. The voyage of the Rajah took just over 3 months from England to Van Diemen's Land. The ages of the Rajah women ranged from 13 years to 60, but most were 22. The oldest, at 60, was Agnes Doherty, a weaver from County Tyrone. Rosa Ford was just 13. Some lived to old age. Margaret Welch was reportedly 101 and 3 months, and according to her death notice, she died unexpectedly. The death of a Rajah woman who poisoned herself led to changes in New Zealand's poison legislation. The most gruesome death, I think, was that of Nancy Robertson, who died of suffocation on board the Shamrock. In March 1847, Nancy's husband, Charles Roberts, and 2 young children left Launceston for Port Phillip, now Victoria. Nancy, who had only 2 weeks of her sentence to serve, was hidden in a box on board, not more than 3 feet in length and 2 feet 6 inches in height, and she died in that box. Nearly 50 of the Rajah women had been on the town, and some were named as prostitutes. Most were born in England. Eliza Deans was from Long Island, America, and Anne Muir was from Spain. Both were tried in Scotland. There were several Scottish-born women and 37 Irish-born women. Nearly 50 convict ships brought women to Van Diemen's Land, but the voyage of the Rajah is noteworthy for the quilt crafted by the convict women during the voyage. Now housed in the National Gallery in Canberra, the quilt is believed to be the only surviving quilt produced on board a convict ship. In 1987, the quilt was discovered in a loft in Scotland. It was purchased and donated to the National Gallery by Les Hollings and the Australian Textile Fund in 1989, and no one seems to know where it was between 1842 and 1987 and how it came to be in the Scottish loft. Robert Bell, Senior Curator, Decorative Arts and Design at the National Gallery, in Unfolded, the Rajah Quilt writes, "The Rajah quilt is one of Australia's most important textiles and a major focus of the National Gallery of Australia's Australian Textiles collection. While it is a work of great documentary importance in Australia's history, it is also an extraordinary work of art, a product of beauty from the hands of many women who, while in the most abject circumstances, were able to work together to produce something of hope." No connection has been found between the quilt's Scottish owners and the women of the Rajah or Elizabeth Spry's British Ladies' Society for whom the quilt was made. Nothing is known about the quilt from the time it arrived in Hobart until it was discovered in Scotland, but it may have travelled on the Rajah's return voyage to England with the ship's captain, Charles Ferguson. How many of you are quilters? Oh, I can't make this up then. The Rajah quilt, a patchwork and applique bed cover or coverlet, is a pieced medallion or framed style quilt with a central block of white cotton decorated with broderie perts, chintz, birds and floral motifs. This central block is framed by 12 different borders of patchwork in printed cotton. The quilt is finished at the outer edge by white cotton decorated with applique daisies on 3 sides and an inscription in cross-stitch surrounded by floral chintz attached with broderie purse on the 4th side. All fabrics used in the Rajah quilt are cotton, with the exception of a small amount of linen and silk thread. And the inscription is up the top. I'll show you an expanded version of that in a minute. How many of you have seen it? How many of you have seen it here? And were you amazed at how vibrant it was? Yeah. It came here in 2004 for Tasmania's 2004 bicentenary. I've seen it again in the National Museum for the Not Just Ned exhibition of Irish stories. It was on display then. And if we could get it to come here, it'd be great. Yeah. Not very often, no. And then under the strictest of circumstances. So we were really lucky to see it when we did, yeah. The quilt's inscription is finely worked in cross-stitch in silk yarn. The centre of the quilt is appliqued in chintz, an expensive and precious fabric which has been carefully sewn to avoid wastage. The techniques and material used in making the quilt indicate, and I quote, "a kind of sewing more expected in an upper-class home," end of quote. The National Gallery of Australia's description of the quilt adds that the pieced medallion style was common in the late 18th century, especially in England and Ireland. Another quote, "From the quilt's 2,815 pieces," I don't know who counted them, and I'm not going to check. "From the quilt's 2,815 pieces, we can see a cross-section of contemporary textile technology of the period, its patterns, printing techniques and the design influences," end of quote. Textile historian Carolyn Ferguson has undertaken detailed research on the Rajah quilt for the Quilters Guild of the British Isles and suggests that although it is extremely difficult to know exactly where the fabrics came from, it is likely that the ladies of the Convict Ship Committee would have sourced them from the Manchester merchants operating from warehouses in London. In particular, Ferguson suggests that the 4 birds, which you can see in that slide, shown on the central panel, connect to the printed cottons produced in Manchester, such as those inspired by the prints of John Potts. Perhaps the quilt survived because it was a presentation quilt made for a special purpose. It was not a typical quilt sewn by poor working class women for everyday use, nor was it representative of the quilts made by convict women on board ship, as these were usually kept by the women or sold at the end of the voyage. There is no list of women who worked on the quilt. The National Gallery comments that, while we do not know the women who worked on it, we can see that there was a considerable variation in their skills. Among the women on that voyage of the Rajah were 15 whose occupations were listed as tailoring or needlework. Curators who examined the quilt initially thought that several pieces had faded extensively. However, an examination of the back of the quilt revealed that these patches were positioned and sewn back to front and had not faded at all. The curators concluded that the work was carried out in poor light or by someone with failing eyesight. That'd be me. They also noted that, I quote, "There are a few patches marked with dark brown, small circular stains, identifiable as blood stains." Again, that would be me, associated with pricked fingers. These stains are on the patches with the crudest stitches, and although the rocking of the boat may have led to numerous pricking, the cause of these stains appears to have been lack of skill. Possibly 20 different hands may be deduced. The fine work on the inscription, however, indicates the hand of a skilled needlewoman. In summary then, the quilt displays at least one highly skilled hand and several less skilled ones. For me, the story of the Rajah quilt raises 2 intriguing questions. Firstly, why were the convict women making the quilt? And secondly, who were the quilters, the many hands who crafted the quilt? The answer to the first question lies partly in the quilt's inscription, "To the ladies of the Convict Ship Committee." That's the best I could do. You probably can't read it from down the back, but bear with me. The quilt's sophisticated inscription reads, "To the ladies of the Convict Ship Committee, this quilt, worked by the convicts of Ship Rajah during their voyage to Van Diemen's Land, is presented as a testimony of the gratitude with which they remember their exertions for their welfare while in England and during their passage, and also as a proof that they have not neglected the ladies' kind admonitions of being industrious." June 1841. In 1810, Elizabeth Fry became a preacher in the Society of Friends, also known as the Quakers. Fry was associated with a Quaker school well known for its tradition of sewing. After witnessing the appalling conditions for women in England's Newgate prison in 1813, Fry devoted her life to prison reform in England and overseas. The period from 1760 to 1840 was one of intense debate about the best way to deal with crime, disorder and poverty. Fry advocated religious instruction and useful labour rather than punishment as a means of reform. Her work was almost entirely concerned with female prisoners. She was thorough in her research about prison management and toured England, Scotland, Ireland and Europe seeking information. Fry's first impression of Newgate Prison painted a grim picture. She wrote, "The part of the prison allotted to them was a scene of the wildest disorder. Swearing, drinking, gambling and fighting were their only employments. Filth and corruption prevailed on every side. Women were ironed in an attempt at control. Their legs and wrists were manacled." Fry's disturbing prison visit was her catalyst to reform. To facilitate reform, Fry established ladies' committees, small groups of women who regularly visited prisons to work directly with the women inside. The notion of reform through labour was given expression in Fry's foundation of the Association for the Improvement of Female Prisoners in Newgate in 1817. It aimed, and I quote, "to provide for the clothing, instruction and employment of the women, to introduce to them a knowledge of the Holy Scriptures and to form in them as much as possible those habits of order, sobriety and industry which may render them docile and peaceable whilst in prison and respectable when they leave it." End of quote. Two women members of the association visited the prisoners daily to read the scriptures aloud. The women prisoners were put to work sewing and knitting under the supervision of prison monitors. A prisoner instructor organised classes for the women to teach them to read the Bible. Fry's philosophy for the care and management of women in jail was extended to the reform and control of transported women, largely through the exertion of the Convict Ship Committee, a subcommittee of the British Ladies' Society for promoting the reformation of female prisoners, which is a mouthful. The Convict Ship Committee was committed to the physical and moral welfare of convict women and their children, many of whom remained with their mothers in prison and accompanied them on convict ships. Before Fry's intervention, conditions on female convict ships were abysmal. Classification and organisation were part of Fry's shipboard reforms. Relief of boredom during the voyage was also a consideration. The ladies of the Convict Ship Committee organised little pieces of coloured cotton for the women to make patchwork quilts. From 1821, each woman transported on a ship leaving from England was provided by the Convict Ship Committee with one Bible, one Hessian apron, one black stuff apron, one black cotton cap and one large Hessian bag to keep her clothes in. They also received one small bag containing one piece of tape, 1 ounce of pins, 100 needles, 4 balls of white sewing cotton, 1 ball of black sewing cotton, 1 ball of blue sewing cotton, 1 ball of red sewing cotton, 2 balls of black worsted, half an ounce each, and 24 hanks of coloured thread. 1 bag of cloth with 8 darning needles, 1 small bodkin fastened on it, and a bodkin is a blunt needle with a large eye, 2 stay laces, 1 thimble, 1 pair of scissors, 1 pair of spectacles when required, 2 pounds patchwork pieces, nearly a kilo, 1 comb, 1 small comb, knife and fork to each mess of 12, and a ball of string to each mess. Miss Kezia Hayter, a genteel and religious woman only in her early 20s, was selected by the British Ladies' Society to be matron on the Rajah. She was given a free passage on the understanding that she would devote her time during the voyage to the improvement of the prisoners. Because of her background and age, she was an unlikely choice to be placed in charge of a shipload of rough working-class convict women, yet she performed remarkably well in the role. Of all the people on board the Rajah, Miss Hayter was the only one with the social status of lady. Everyone else was a convict or crew member. During the voyage, Miss Hayter became engaged to Captain Charles Ferguson, the master of the Rajah. On her arrival in Van Diemen's Land, Miss Hayter had no specific position, for the British Ladies' Society had only organised her work as matron on board ship. The Society expected her to report about the welfare of the women during the voyage, as well as the conditions in the Cascades female factory. Miss Hayter's diary for part of 1842 survives, as does some of her correspondence to Elizabeth Fry in England. After arriving in the colony, Miss Hayter spent some time with the Archers at Brickenden in the north, just outside Longford, and with the Betts family in Macquarie Street, teaching at their school and volunteering at the Cascades female factory, where she taught the convict women and visited them in the cells. She spent time with Lady Franklin, who invited her to spend a few days at Government House. Unable to cope with the stress of her female factory work, Miss Hayter resigned, and in April 1842 she left Hobart to live at Brickenden. For most of the year she was governess to the children of William Archer of Brickenden. Several of the Rajah convicts were at Brickenden or close by, and Miss Hayter maintained a personal interest in their welfare. One of these was Elizabeth Slater. Before she was transported, Elizabeth Slater was on the town for 6 years, and for 6 years off and on, but her conduct on board the Rajah was described by the Surgeon Superintendent Donovan as in a difficult position, the best character I can give. It's not clear what that difficult position was. She was a plain needlewoman and may have worked with Miss Hayter making the Rajah quilt during the voyage. Another was Margaret Miller, a Rajah convict who had been originally assigned to Archer at Brickenden. Margaret was one of a handful of women whose shipboard conduct was recorded by the Surgeon Superintendent as the very best character I can give. Miss Hayter also took under her wing Rosa Ford, a young Scottish convict girl who arrived on the Rajah. Transported at the age of 13 for housebreaking, Rosa was in the Longford area when Miss Hayter was at Brickenden. She was charged several times for uselessness, the last in June 1842. In June, reflecting Fry's belief in the possibility of reform and salvation, Miss Hayter wrote of Rosa, "Fervently do I pray that she may be numbered amongst the redeemed, and I shall never feel grateful enough if she is a chosen vessel in the hands of the Lord to save this young thing from sin." Although Kezia's diary survived, it is full of religious statements, and that's probably not surprising considering her background. She later took Rosa into her household, but it was not a successful placement. A month later, a disillusioned Miss Hayter wrote, "I saw a most awful instance of hardened guilt and falsehood last night in Rosa Ford. It was a perfect shock to me, teaching me how depraved was human nature when left to itself." And unfortunately, she doesn't say what Rosa did, but I'd love to know. No details were given, but Rosa did not accompany Miss Hayter when she left the colony. Instead, she was assigned to a series of employees in the Longford and Launceston districts. Several offences of larceny resulted in Rosa serving extended periods in the Cascades female factory. Charles Ferguson and Kezia Hayter married in Hobart in July 1843. In 1845, Kezia sailed with the ship to London, returning to Hobart heavily pregnant in June 1846. 1 month later, the Fergusons' first child, George, was born in Hobart. They went on to have 6 more children. Kezia Ferguson continued to assist women going to Australia, working with the British Ladies' Female Immigration Society, established in London to ameliorate the conditions of female emigrants sailing to the colonies. In 1852, Charles Ferguson became the first Chief Harbour Master for the Port of Melbourne. Charles and Kezia settled at Williamstown, where Ferguson Street was named in his honour. Kezia continued her philanthropic work as a member of the Williamstown Ladies Benevolent Society, formed in 1856. She died in Adelaide in 1885, aged 67. Jenny Parrott, in her honours thesis, wrote that, and I quote, "Someone with Miss Hayter's genteel family background, sensitivity and strong feelings of Christian charity and duty was unlikely to survive in the rough, tough society of Van Diemen's Land in the 1840s." End of quote. The arduous challenges of prison reform work, combined with the hostility of convict authorities and some sections of the colonial press, and the general lack of support for what she was trying to achieve, virtually single-handed, were demanding for such a young, inexperienced woman. In the circumstances, her retreat to her genteel friends in the northern part of the colony was perhaps inevitable. Yet she displayed a certain strength of character, forcefulness and resilience in leaving friends and family and sailing to the other side of the world virtually alone. Her constancy to her principles epitomised her life. The task of identifying the women who worked on the Rajah Quilt intrigues historians, curators and descendants of the Rajah convict women, all of whom are captivated, and not only by the vibrancy of the quilt and the intricacy of its needlework, but also the extraordinary story of the quilt's survival. Experts who have studied the quilt have suggested that Matron Hayter supervised the making of the quilt and was most probably responsible for the special sections of the quilt, including the finely stitched insert. Certainly, Miss Hayter was recognised as exceptionally accomplished. In their annual report of 1842, the Ladies' Committee wrote that the prisoners in the Rajah were peculiarly favoured because they were under the superintendence of a female of superior attainments. Advanced embroidery skills employed at home were considered a testament to gentility, and so it's feasible that the inscription on the quilt was not only composed by Miss Hayter, but was also sewn by her. As already mentioned, curatorial experts concluded that possibly 20 different hands contributed to the sewing of the quilt. Have you got the handout? I've got the handout. Okay. As already mentioned, curatorial experts concluded that possibly 20 different hands contributed to the sewing of the quilt. From surviving convict records, it's possible to identify those women on the Rajah who had some degree of sewing skill. There is no conclusive evidence, however, that these were the women who sewed the quilt. An unpublished analysis of the women of the Rajah drew up a list of 29 potential quilt makers, including 2 tailoresses and several dressmakers and needlewomen. As most of you will know, convict records routinely recorded the trade or occupation of the convict. There are 3 primary record types for each convict, with an amount of information and the format of the information varying over time. Newly arrived prisoners were interviewed by government clerks before leaving the ship, and their details were recorded in ledgers. The conduct record in the period of assignment, when the Rajah arrived, did not record trades or occupations. The indent usually recorded a convict's trade, but unfortunately no indent for the Rajah has survived. In the period when the Rajah arrived, trades were recorded on the description list. Trades were also recorded on appropriation lists, which record the trade of the convict. The basic details recorded were the convict's name, trade and colonial employer, and sometimes the residence of the colonial employer. During the interview process, the prisoners were subjected to a thorough examination of their physical condition, and any marks, scars, tattoos or other distinguishing features were recorded. The description list records these features, and so it is possible to obtain the physical description of the women on the Rajah. For example, Eliza Deans, tried in Edinburgh for stealing a pair of boots, was 22, 5'2.5" tall, with a black complexion, oval head, black hair, broad forehead, black eyebrows, brown eyes, a medium nose, medium mouth with thick lips and a round chin. In the marks section, it was noted that she was a woman of colour. Her native place was recorded as Long Island, America. More importantly, perhaps, the description list also includes her trade. She was recorded as a nurse and needlewoman. From the description list compiled on arrival, we found 17 quilter candidates. And when I say we, I'm referring to Trudy Cowley, who was my co-author for Patchwork Prisoners, The Story of the Rajah. The Mitchell Library in Sydney holds a record compiled when the women embarked in April 1841. It's a standard convict document with the following headings: name, age, crime, conviction details, when and where, sentence, married or single, trade, jailer's report and character on board. The embarkation record is interesting for the comparison it provides with the record compiled when the women disembarked in Hobart Town just over 3 months later. On the embarkation document, only about 37% have a trade or occupation recorded. Of these, only 11 have sewing-related trades, including 7 not listed as having a sewing trade on the description list, recorded on arrival. From the embarkation records, then, another 7 possible quilters, women with some degree of sewing skill, have been identified. Furthermore, 13 of the convicts identified as having some sewing skill on arrival were not recorded as having sewing-related trades when they left England, all of which complicates the task of identifying the possible quilters. It's possible that at least some of the women who could sew when they arrived in Hobart gained the skill on board ship. They are possibly those who are recorded as needlewoman or needleworker, implying a less skilled occupation. A plain needleworker, for example, worked making or mending clothes or household items, household linen. Another complication are the trades given on the appropriation list. These lists were used to assign the women to employers on arrival. 41 of the Rajah convicts are listed as having sewing skills. Only 2 of these were listed with sewing skills on embarkation, but not on arrival. I guess you can see it nearly drove me mad trying to work out which of the women were the sewers. On arrival, one was recorded as a housemaid and another as a house servant. Perhaps some of the women stated that they could sew at the time of appropriation in order to get a better position. It seems obvious to me that the trades recorded when the women arrived in Hobart reflect the needs of the colonial labour market. There were, for example, no women listed as cooks or bakers on the embarkation list, but on arrival, of those who had some trade recorded, there were 5. There were even more on the appropriation lists. Overall, there were about 50 who had some degree of cooking skill when they were assigned. Many of the trades recorded on the embarkation list were relevant to England or Scotland, but not to Van Diemen's Land. For example, frame tenter, weaver, huckster, wool spinner, piecer in a cotton mill, yarn winder, clipper, factory worker and reeler. One of the most unusual discrepancies between the embarkation list and description list is that of Mary Ann Smith, who was a huckster when she embarked, a tailoress when she arrived, and a dressmaker and tailoress in the appropriation lists. A huckster was at the lower end of the socio-economic scale. Hucksters made their living in towns by selling fruit, vegetables, fish, or other foodstuffs on street corners. They usually purchased items at a local market, then walked them into a residential area. Hucksters were often women, and huckstering was one of the few forms of employment available to women who had no skills. A tailoress, on the other hand, was a highly skilled and specialised occupation. Mary Ann Smith's transformation from huckster to dressmaker and tailoress is problematic. As a widow, she may have struggled economically, but there is no clue as to why she did not use her sewing skills to earn a living, unless, of course, she developed them during the voyage. When Mary Ann's sentence of transportation for life was handed down, she thanked the judge. Perhaps she was looking for a new start. In summary then, there were 17 women with sewing skills according to the description list, 11 with sewing skills on the embarkation list, and 41 with sewing skills on the appropriation lists. 46 convicts in all with sewing skills. Again, it must be stressed that there is no conclusive evidence that these were the women who sewed the quilt. Any of the 46 women listed on your handout, which you will soon receive, could have been involved in making that quilt. I've made Sandra blush. As curator Robert Bell writes, the Rajah quilt has miraculously endured the ravages of time and physical decay to provide us with a tangible link to this country's fragile early society and the women who transcended their conditions to work together in the service of art. The exquisitely crafted Rajah quilt is not only an important reminder of the skills and creativity of convict women, but also suggests that their experience was individual, diverse and complex. They were not one-dimensional characters. The pieces of still colourful patchwork are evocative and eloquent. In many ways, our research for the book Patchwork Prisoners echoes the creation of the Rajah quilt. We have pieced together fragments of the lives of the Rajah women in the same way women crafted the quilt. Thank you.
I'm done today. Thank you very much. Rob.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you. And it goes with your client.
It does.
Quilt. And I'm going to run down and get the handout. But I think I have to do more because we've got such a great amount of people here. So I ask questions and I shall be back.
And the handout will show you the names of the 46 women that we thought were convict, sewed the quilt, and where we got the information from. And you can see when you have a look at the handout that it wasn't an easy task to find the women who may have sewn the quilt. Patchwork Prisoners, the Rajah quilt and the women who made it, was published in 2013, and the remaining copies, there's about 6 to 8 of them, are available through 40 South online. But if you'd like a copy, see me at the end of the session. Now, do we have any questions? Yes. No, because it was found in 1987.
Yeah, what I mean is, were there records of the quilt being made? Was it known generally its existence before 1987? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Only through the records of the British Society.
So
yeah,
the society had a record that they had.
Because they, and I think, and I quoted that they were, the women on the Rajah were in exceptionally good hands because of the matron and the work that she did with them. So it was known. It just isn't known what happened to it after it left here. Yeah, it's a good question.
So, I mean, when it was found in 1987, it could be linked back to a proper quilt, in other words.
Yeah.
And it was known it would be made, or it was discoverable.
Yes, and because the inscription says to the ladies of the Convict Ships Committee. So all those pieces of the quilt fitted together nicely.
One thing though, it's unfinished. It's not actually a quilt. It's the top of a quilt, but it hasn't got any backing. So it will never have been used as a quilt.
No, and it's described by the National Gallery's textile curator as a coverlet. So, and I don't know, I mean, I would expect a coverlet to have some sort of backing on it as well, but yeah. So,
Top, and finished.
yeah.
How big is it?
huge. Bigger than the screen, probably twice the size of the screen. Would you agree with that? Those that have seen it, yeah, it's very big. Yeah, it's not just a little quilt that you'd put on top of a cot or something. It's
queen size.
Yeah.
At least.
Yep, queen size, and so colourful. You know, it's just. It was, yes, yeah. Yeah.
Is it on display in Canberra?
No, it comes out, and they usually say when it's coming out. So it came here, as I said, in 2004. It was on display in the National Museum for the Irish, not just Ned exhibition, and then it was tucked away again. So, I mean, you could write to the National Gallery and say, when's it coming out again, and will it be in Hobart? And let me know. Yeah, so it's a very precious thing, and I think the colour of it, the vibrancy of it, has survived because it hasn't been out in broad daylight, even household light. Mm.
So what does the back of it?
Pardon?
What does the back of it?
Well, I wasn't brave enough to pick up the back of it. What does the back of it look like? Yeah. Yeah, it's sewn. It's complete. That's one of the women on the Rajah, but we don't think she was a sewer, although her descendant does. And that's another one. So.
Their name was Rajah as well as the name of the ship. Is that right? Or
No, the name of the quilt is called the Rajah Quilt because it was created on the Rajah convict ship. Yeah. When I do convict research, I put the name of the convict and then in italics the name of the ship on which she came. So that's why, yeah, that's why that's there.
Diane? Did you look at the captain's log on the Rajah?
We didn't find a captain's log, but if the person who's asking the question knows of it, I'll be.
Well, they said if there is not one, is that unusual? There's not a captain's log.
Yeah, some of them are in the National Archives UK, but there are not as many surviving captain's logs, I think, as there are surgeons' journals.
Yes.
Which are also, there are copies here, but the originals are in the National Archives UK. Yeah, so I think the answer is there aren't many. And I think some of them are at Greenwich, but.
The surgeon's log is fascinating because there was only one death.
Yeah.
And that's extraordinary.
Yeah, it was. But by that stage, they'd improved the conditions on board convict ships, and they also had the matron. So the Irish convict ships didn't get a matron until 1847. Yeah, we were mad, crazy beavers digging wherever we could. So, yeah.
but my thoughts about this changed in the women's profession or whether they were sewers or not.
Yeah.
I'm thinking if they were simple people,
Yeah.
unqualified people or not society or whatever,
Yeah.
they probably had to stitch basically just for their own clothing or
Yeah.
household items. So they would have some level of experience that they were probably hesitant to put down as an occupation. But after they'd been on the ship, perhaps they thought, oh, well, actually, I am qualified as a sewer. So
Yeah.
change them.
And that's, I mean, that's possible. You look at someone like Rosa Ford, who was 13 and didn't have any skills, but that's the reason she was being sent back to government all the time for being useless, because she couldn't do the work that was required of her. So I think, I think you're right in that there is an element of the women trying to work out the best path for their survival. Yeah.
And another comment I wanted to make was, I don't know if anyone in the room is aware, but there is a play that's going to be at the Theatre Royal in November.
Yep.
I think there are 2 days that it's running about the Rajah Quilt.
And Lady Franklin, I think. I think there's a poster or something downstairs about that, but it's certainly being promoted heavily on Facebook. Yeah. So it should be interesting.
And I know they're very keen to get people to go along, because they said they were a very small theatre group and they relied a lot on support from the public. So I just thought, because there were so many of us here today who are interested in the topic, there might be people that are unaware of that who may like to go along.
So I can find out that information if you'd like to contact me. And I can give you my card, or you can write down my email address, and then I can send you the information about the performance at the Theatre Royal if you're interested.
Someone also asked how many crew members there were on board Rajah. None of that information.
I don't know. And there's no list of the crew members. So usually what happens is that the crew members will come up in the surgeon's report if they're sick or if they die. And you're asking someone who can only see convicts, It's only when there's an intersection between the crew members and the convict women that I might pick something up. Yeah. There's one down the back. Yeah.
Representation, little piece out of each boy's conduct record, a tiny little glimpse of something relating to her, and it's a wonderful piece.
So
You find it hard to hear.
Sorry,
Sure.
and I'm trying to see faces. If you've got the information from TMAG, and if you've got the information from Theatre Royal, are you able to send it to Sandra, who can then send it to the people who have registered for this session?
It is not the
Yeah. Okay. And I've got a question. Why do you think that the performance at the Theatre Royal, the exhibition at TMAG are focusing on the Rajah when there were 49 other female convict ships? What is it about the Rajah? It's the
a certain number.
No,
Particularly now
No.
that everyone's focusing on.
no.
I guess it's the one single object that ties, a whole group of women together.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
and there's not much in the way of tangible objects for convict women. Yep.
Dianne, that's a piece of work at the at TMAG. The person who created that looked at the description list of all the women and painted them accordingly, and they're only quite small.
Yeah.
And I thought that was fascinating that that person went to so much trouble to get things right.
Yeah. The description list is available online through the library, and its reference is Con 19/1/1. The other records that are listed on your handout are from the Mitchell Library. One of them is on microfilm here, and the other one is a really obscure reference, the CY reference. But you can certainly look at the records of the Rajah through the library's website and also the Female Convicts Research Centre database, which has a lot of additional information about all of the convict women. Yep.
Did the master of the ship, Ferguson, have any contact with Scotland?
Well, his name's Ferguson, so yeah.
No,
Yeah.
They returned to England.
Yeah.
What, 2 years afterwards?
So that's my theory, is that he took it back and somehow it ended up in Scotland. But then he spent the rest of his life as the harbour master for Melbourne. So he deposited it and came back. I don't know.
I actually, because it wasn't finished, it was given to one of the ladies, whether she was in Scotland or not, and it was just kept and never used. And because it was not a usable finished object, although it was beautiful.
There's no evidence that any of the convict women went back from the Rajah.
She went back with him.
Yeah. So, yeah, it could have fallen upon the matron to do it, but she was having babies by that time, so I don't know.
But given it's addressed to the committee, it was clearly meant to be sent back. That's why I read that inscription. Yeah. So it may have just gone back on the next ship back to Scotland, back to England.
I think that's what happened, but what happened after that is all shrouded in mystery. So one day someone might find the answer.
There's 4 performances on the 23rd and 24th of November for Jane Franklin and the Rajah Quilt, and it's Lost Voices.
Lost Voices?
That's what the play's called, Lost Voices. You understand what?
Are you able to trace any of the descendants of the?
Those photos came from descendants. And I had a Facebook message from someone this week who was a descendant. He'd seen that this was on. He's interstate, but he mentioned that he was a descendant. So there are quite a few descendants, and yeah. We done?
Start there. The program, because we've got on it next week. I haven't actually got it, isn't it? You might have it yes, because we have another
One
whole
bag,
group of grads. With Dr. Jones, he's done a lot of at the Convict Centre. So that interesting is, I'm sure you've been interested in that one at the time, but that's next Wednesday.
Quilt came over, and all the local quilt participated in an exhibition. And
So when did the ship arrive in Hobart?
1841. It was July.
So dated June. Oh, okay, so it's dated June 1841.
19th of July, 1841.
So finished.
So
that was added before they arrived. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would then sort of suggest together. Well,
yeah. There's nothing in the curatorial context on the National Gallery site that says that it was unfinished, and there's no backing. I'll go back and have another look because that's got me intrigued.
But what you said was they thought it was faded, but when they looked through the back, they did it reverse now. It'd be obvious when you piece up.
Maybe they took the back off to show those features. I really don't know, and I'll go back and have a look. Yeah.
There's a couple of them it does have a plain bit of fabric on the back. But could you see the backing that it had absolutely nothing on the back?
You can see all the roaring.
You can see the roaring.
That I'm really intrigued in this thing. I've never heard something about it. It's very interesting having a look at it. It's a really crappy film. So it's an embroidered ceremony. And it's really hard to make a photo, and I'm not probably
Diane?
First thing I saw Bennett was one of the Bennett girls called Margaret. And that's when she had the baby, that's where the baby died.
Yeah.
That's why the grave is outside the child.
Yeah.
I think you might have.
We had a couple of questions online, and one of them said she's a descendant.
Oh, Diploma.
Yeah, so she's listened in too.
Oh, good.
Oh, she is still there?
There's several questions.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
You're right.
What were the needles made of? 100 needles, that's a lot. Were they bone? They were metal.
They don't say they're bone.
I was just wondering why you need 100 needles, because you wouldn't break that many needles.
I don't know.
That's
They
a
could
lot.
get lost on the ship. I mean,
Oh, yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I know. But what I'm saying is, most people.
I don't know.
It's a good like myself. I don't have 100 needles,
Yeah, I was just like, Mum, email me and I'll see what I can find out.
It just sort of, why so many?
The chat. I'll just email you with my contact
Yeah,
details.
that's really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Can I give you that? Is that what you wanted? That's just to remind the girl to post, because I still don't get any newsletters if you've seen it.
We've only had two.
Oh, I
One was
haven't-
at the beginning of the year, and then we
ones you
got a
don't-
new
Oh.
treasurer
Yeah.
and membership thing.
Yeah, the only one I've got is membership. Eh?
Yeah, and I asked Jane, the secretary, to make sure, because I've been away, to make sure that she posted
Thank you.
it to you.
Yeah, well, that was apart from the ones you gave me last time for the missing ones,
Yeah,
and this is the only one I've got. That's why I don't
we've
know.
only had two.
Oh, okay, that's well.
Yeah.
It's okay. I want to still be in it.
Yeah.
But
Good.
see you Sunday. If I don't talk up with you.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. That's why.
It was a grand celebration when it was out here.
And lots of people were inspired to make quilts on the convict Rajah Quilt theme.
Oh, yes, well, we had a grand exhibition. We had up in Launceston, and we made the metal quilt,
Yes.
which
yeah.
is still
It's
down.
still, well, where is it?
It's at the Female Factory.
Have you been up there lately?
Not like it's about time I went back and polished the central panel, which has got the names of all the women in the children. They had
And
it.
there's another one that's hanging in the meeting room there. I don't know that the metal one's still there.
Oh,
There were a lot of changes when they built the History and Interpretation Centre.
and they promised that it would be against.
I'm going up there tomorrow. I'll report to the Paths board, so I'll check it out.
Check it
But
out.
I don't know if I've got your email address.
Yeah, the red ones and then the side of.
If you email me, then I'll tell you tomorrow. I've got
That was the last.
Okay, bad.
I know, several years ago.
before they built the new history.
No, after.
Well, it opened in
So
2 years ago.
because originally they had put it in front of the gift shop,
Yeah,
and we asked.
which is no longer there. I think there's another gift, a new gift shop.
New gift shop. No, it's on. We went back.
I'll definitely check and let you know, but just email me so I can email you back. It's good to see you. Thank you.
Online as well, yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
It was a descendant online.
Right. Do you know who it is?
Well, what she said was, and I was looking for her name. It was a Lee.
Lee.
Lee was her name, just, but I'll have her email.
Yeah.
And she's, it says third granddaughter of Amelia Lane.
Yeah.
I was looking for that name on the handout.
Yeah, because a lot of the descendants would like to be the descendants of the souls.
Oh, of course you want to be.
I would. We can actually say how.
Queen size.
I'm not going to be bigger than this.
Yeah, probably got measurements somewhere. But
They just That's a nice thing. And then we get it on the way it all comes. That's hard.
Anyway,
a lot of records.
oh, okay, yeah, that's right.
That's a descendant. Yeah, she's online.
She's interesting, but I don't we identify her as
Whether they were there or whether they touched the fabric, very different.
They just weren't recorded.
Put one in and they don't.
Always hiding for someone to say, both bloodstones, can we get any DNA?
That's what I was thinking. That's a DNA. It's a quilter.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Big enough.
They've been made to go to the whole lot, the ship would rock.
But surely you couldn't extract it without like removing the integrity of the item.
I don't know, one stage they wanted to.
I know.
DNA.
Yeah, that's right.
That didn't happen, so I doubt that it's not happening.
Yeah, well.
No, because you'd have to ruin the quilt.
Yeah.
You'd have to cut out
Yeah.
that
And it's such a precious thing.
I mean, I know it's very much about his but isn't that it's lovely to.
But it's just the national.
Yeah, that's true.
But if we
It belongs here.
which we haven't.
Well, I think that's what Kate Whitaker, she was the one that gave the talk on Elizabeth Bride.
Yeah.
And she's the one who wrote the play that is shown at the wall in Royal. She is trying to get it to come down here for that, for the play.
Well, good luck to her.
Yeah.
It was Jim Baker. That whole about 200 years ago. This is all working the it's the best thing to be mad if something because we've got the conditions for it. That's where it was that have you got $50 on it? I don't have a card to get that. This one, it's not marked. If you could get a cash or a card, I'll get it signed.
That's fine. You might actually.
In and around the library.
It's book week, so we're a little bit, interesting.
Okay. I can't give money on the card. I haven't got any
In the morning.
Okay, yes.
And then we go report.